A major move for the New York Jets front office as former Vikings GM and 30-plus year executive Rick Spielman comes on board to advise, assist the team. This, as well as some other moves in the front office that were announced this week. I'm Glenn Naughton with Jet Nation Radio, jetnation.com. Be sure to log into jetnation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. Joined today by my co-host, Dylan Terriman. Dylan, how we doing?
Doing all right. Finally feel like I don't have symptoms of the flu, so happy to be on and talking about not only the front office shakeup, but a little bit of Senior Bowl too.
Yeah, and if you've been following this show for any length of time, you know that increasingly over the past year or so, I've been mentioning Rick Spielman and his podcast on CBS Sports with Ryan Wilson with First Pick more than any other podcast, draft podcast out there, because it's a top-notch show. Rick Spielman does great work on there. When Spielman was announced as somebody who would be working with the Jets with the 33rd team, I think I tweeted out, just give Spielman the job, make him the GM. Hearing his philosophy, he's sort of an old school guy. He's only just, I would say, just getting, not that he likes it, but he's just now accepting the fact that a lot of guys opt out of their bowl games. A lot of guys transfer schools and are unwilling to deal with adversity. He's not a fan of it. As he always says, if we roll the ball out and you don't want to play, like, that's a problem. And that's an increasing thing in college football. More and more guys putting themselves ahead of the team. Interesting one would be Cam Ward if the Jets talk to him, because for those of you who recall, Cam Ward, who we love on this show, did something that Spielman himself said. And this was the first time I heard him say, look, I'm finally coming to grips with the fact that so many guys don't play in their bowl games. But what Cam Ward did was worse than anything anyone else has done, because he showed up for his game, suited up for his game, was playing in his game, was winning his game. And as it was slipping away, he chose to stay on the sidelines, and the game to him was just about hitting some personal milestones. And then he left his teammates hung out to lose their final college game for some of them. So Spielman was critical. And he said, when we interview him at the combine, because they did that on their show, they had a lot of prospects. He said, I'm going to ask him, why'd you bail on your guys? So that'll be an interesting interview if they do sit down with him. I'm not sure if you listened to their show today, Dylan, but Spielman basically said he will be working with the Jets. He expects that he'll be going to the combine and pro days, but he would have no decision-making authority. He would basically be a sounding board for Aaron Glenn and Moogie, and any major or really any football decisions, they will touch base with him first. Your thoughts on the move, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one that at first in the process was maybe said in jest by some Jets fans, but like the overarching point was we needed a guy in this senior football ops type of role. And I only listened to the part where he talked about what he was going to do with the Jets, but he said he was going to start fixing things from the football ops side of it. And that's been the side that we know needs a huge shakeup. So obviously we're seeing it with more trickle down firings and hirings, obviously, but to get somebody in here with this much experience, who's been a former GM, I mean, the clip going viral back again of him laughing at the Eagles for taking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. I love those type of moments in the draft room. And obviously because it was COVID, we had like a deeper inside look at like all the teams that messed up that draft that year. It was kind of a weird one, but I think to get Spielman on board is huge for a first-time GM like Mooj, because we don't know what he's going to do. Like, we can only hope that, like, Aaron Glenn is, the front man, like the face of the organization between the two, but Mooj still has to do something on this team. And, to bring in a guy like Spielman to just be a sounding board, like you said, like he said on the pod also, it's like, that's exactly what we needed, was a football ops guy. I thought like a Dimitrov would have been the guy. So this is like the football GM, like former GM that I actually really like too. So Dimitrov, speaking of him, he did an interview with Jake Asman, and he was talking about how former GMs need to just understand that they might not become GMs again, and that they have to take these football ops position. So maybe Spielman did want to get back in the game in some capacity. So for him to, kick the door down with the Jets after helping us in the search, obviously he saw the inner workings of the Johnsons and Jaime and Ira and all these guys doing the process and helping them in the process. So glad he could stick on. I thought it was really cool on the pod. He already had the cool Jets polo and the Jets coffee cup, so he's already rocking the merch. So I'm glad. He said it was going to be more of a remote role, but I still think, like you said, he's going to go to the combine, all the important events, and then possibly training camp too. I mean, if he's not in the facility some of the time, I feel like that'd be cool too. So I think it's all around a good hire and probably the best one so far since the actual Aaron Glenn hire itself.
Yeah, I think I think it's a great hire. I think I would expect too that he would be at the facility at some point during the year, even if he is
Yeah.
primarily working remotely from home. He did say on the pod, I thought it was interesting, because his co-host Ryan Wilson said to him, he said, "Are you just talking here, or do you mean what you're saying?" And Spielman kind of said to them, again, I don't know what's been agreed upon with Woody, but Rick Spielman, and he said, "No, I'm serious." He's like, "Keep my seat warm. When I'm done with my gig in a couple of years with the Jets, I want to come back and do this." So I don't know if he's already looking at this as like it's a 1 or 2 year thing where he's going to help them transition. Because he certainly didn't sound like a guy who thought he would be here for 3, 4, 5 years. We'll see what happens with that. But I'll tell you what, the one, and it's funny, he said something today. It was sort of, their farewell show, reminiscing a little bit about what they've done there. And at one point, he did get emotional. I was surprised. He got a little choked up saying goodbye to his co-host Ryan Wilson. Said he's had a lot of fun there, the couple of years, and he said the thing he liked most is that, he said, "Look, in my GM role, I got to be buttoned up. I got to be, business serious with the media."
Right.
Which is a shame because it's great personality. I mean, I love that pod, not just for the football content, but the dynamic between Spielman and Wilson, the busting of each other's chops, a lot of laugh. Listen, my wife is born and raised in England. She can name the NFL teams, and that's about it. A couple players. She doesn't follow football, but every now and then I'll pop that pod on when we're in the car, and she'll be like, "Oh, I like this one." And it's just because it's funny and they make you laugh. And yeah, I thought that was actually kind of cool that Spielman it clearly meant a lot to him to be part of that show. And he wasn't kidding when he said he wanted to come back. And he did say, that was his favorite part. He got to be himself and loosen up a little bit and show his true self and not be the buttoned up guy that he has to be with the media. So,
Well, I was gonna say, hopefully he's not the one like talking to the media as much, so we can still get those versions of him with the Jets. Because anytime somebody's unfiltered like that, then you're just getting the best version of themselves. So that's kind of what you get when you listen to the podcast. And like I've only listened to a few episodes here and there that you've shared that were like, "Oh, this is really important on the pod. Go listen to it." And I get that sense too. It's like they've worked like 2 or 3 years together now, so like you could tell there's definitely good chemistry between the two of them on the pod.
yeah, so listen, it's a big move, as you said. Maybe Aaron Glenn's biggest. I think adding Turner to the offensive staff was a big move because this is a very green group, and now you've added Turner to the offensive staff. Wilkes, obviously, between Wilkes and Glenn, there's not an issue there with experience in running a defense, but running a front office. Moogie is first time GM, so having someone, I guess my only concern, and it's funny, I'd mentioned it earlier in the day in the forums on Jet Nation before the Spielman hire. I'm not so much against adding a guy like Spielman, but without knowing the true inner workings of what's going on and who's making what call, it's like, is this just another guy in the process where now it's Moogie, Spielman, Woody, Ira, Jaime? Like how does the decision making go? Especially again, all of this stuff, I'm sure whatever structure they have in place will be absolutely fine as long as things are going well. But when things don't go well and someone feels like their voice isn't being heard, and if Jaime says I'm the president and I feel like I'm not, having enough say, or whoever the many the many clowns in the circus behind the scenes,
Mhm.
and I will say this, I kind of, on the one hand, as much as I respect Spielman, he's still, at the end of the day, he's a human being, and now he's a human being with a boss who he has to answer to, and Woody Johnson. He kind of tried to dispel the myth. He was like, oh, there's this public perception out there about Woody, and it's he's not the way they say he is, which may
Mhm.
be true, but it may also be him trying to help. I mean, as I said during the Moogie press conference, there was about a 10-second span where I felt like he was a hostage reading from a statement written by his captors. I would like to assure Jets fans the Johnsons are prioritizing winning, and they are very good, and they love the fans so much.
Mhm.
Like, okay, now I can get back to what I wanted to say. So again, I like Spielman. I like the hire. Uh, I have some concerns with the number of people that are, as they say, too many cooks in the kitchen. Are we
Right.
at that point now with this team?
Yeah, who's actually responsible for the recipe? And I want to go back to the Thomas Dimitrov interview one more time because he mentioned Jaime Elhai right at the very beginning. He gave praise to Jaime, and then like 10 minutes into the interview with Jake, he's like, "Did I mention how much I like Jaime Elhai?" And I'm like, "Whoa, this is too like." Drops of Jaime's name in such a positive way. And he basically said that he bridges the gap between the business and the football side of it, which we kind of understood, but we just don't know, obviously, to what extent. So if he's more of the business side of it, trying to bridge the two, maybe Spielman and Jaime could work together also in this whole thing. And Spielman's just bringing more of the football side to the business bridge, So I don't know how it's going to work, but like you said, maybe there's if winning, that's the only thing that's going to cure it. And if you start losing, then everybody's going to say too many cooks. Who's bringing the recipe to the table? Because obviously that's when conflict's going to happen. But yeah, for now, you just gotta hope that everybody's, I guess, cooler heads will prevail for now. And I mean, the other coach front office hire I was going to ask you about. Do you like how much they're taking from George Payton and the Broncos? Like this is technically, I guess, the third guy, but they're just all centered around George Payton, the Broncos guy. So, what do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, look, in time we'll know. The thing that worries me most about these hirings, about the all these guys, is that, I mean, this is may not necessarily just my opinion, because when they first hired Moogie, I googled this and I did find some articles. There were a fair number of people who thought that Patton, and therefore Moogie as his top assistant, he didn't get a lot of mentions because he was not the main guy, but that they were on the hot seat in Denver. They made a
Mhm.
lot of really, really bad moves. And then they hired Sean Payton, and Sean Payton showed up. And I listened to, as I said, Scott Mason did a great job breaking down the candidates and bringing in writers from the cities that these guys were from. And the guy he had in from Denver talked about Peyton, talked about the drafting of Bo Nix, which, people say, hey, look, Moogie and Peyton or Patton, they drafted Nix and he turned the franchise around. The way the story went, according, I forget the gentleman's name, but the writer that Scott had in basically said he couldn't recall if it was the pro day or the workout, but he said the story, to his understanding, was that they were watching Bo Nix throw, and Sean Payton leaned over to George Patton and said, "He's our pick. He's the guy." Like, that was
Mhm.
the process.
Yeah.
Was Sean Payton, likely future Hall of Fame head coach, identified him and saved everybody's job. He's not coming with, we're getting Aaron Glenn, who again, I said many times, my top choice on defense. Um, so I'm not knocking that. That's we'll see. You're bringing in a guy who I believe, the Russell Wilson you could make a case that was the worst contract in NFL history. I mean, it was the biggest dead cap hit in NFL history, so by that
Mhm.
measure, it was. They may be dealing with the second biggest now. Um, the Randy Gregory deal. I mean, this was a dicey guy who was injured a
Mhm.
ton, and they paid him a boatload of money, and he got injured a ton, and that ended up being more money thrown down the drain. I think he did play a little bit and played well for them when he was healthy, but they gave a lot of money to an injured guy. So there were some really, really bad football moves in Denver before Peyton arrived. Um, so rating that, I mean, I understand hiring guys you're familiar with.
Hmm.
Um, and like everything else, win and nobody cares. But if you lose, it's going to be, oh, nepotism, and it's just a bunch of good old boys. And that, I've seen people say that about Salah because he brought in, when you hire your best man or whoever was whose best man, I
Sure,
can't
yeah.
remember. I've done a long, exhaustive search for a great offensive coordinator, and it just happens to be my best man. What are the odds?
Right.
Same thing here with Moogie. I need an assistant. I need a right hand man, and it's my old boss's nephew. Who knew? Best man for the job.
Hmm.
So there will be criticism if they fail. But I don't know. I'm torn. I don't want to be too harsh one way or the other because they haven't played a game yet. Maybe these moves work out, maybe they don't. But yeah, it would have been nice if they came from an organization that was on a little bit better path before, again, Sean Payton showed up and saved everyone.
Yeah, yeah, I can agree with that. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of plucking from Denver because, like you said about the whole Sean Payton versus George Payton thing, Sean Payton is the face of the Broncos, in my opinion, and it's really no secret how much he like fell in love with Bo Nix in the process. There's so many crazy like draft night stories about Sean Payton, and like there was just one of Jay Glazer talking at the NFL Honors about how the week leading up, Sean Payton was so scared that the Rams were going to jump the Broncos for Bo Nix. And Jay had to call Sean McVay and get the okay to tell Sean Payton that he wasn't taking him. So, like, I don't know, obviously, who in the front office was just like, all right, Payton, we'll take whoever you want. And, maybe they liked him, maybe they didn't. So you just got to hope that. I mean, Mooj wasn't even on my list. I had a list of 40 something GM names that I've tried to find, like just articles of potential names of guys. And he was never on any of those lists. So it's just, he did kind of come out of nowhere, but you got to just, for me, the whole thing comes down to Aaron Glenn more so than anybody else. And I think if he fails, the whole thing's going to fail, but there's a chance where like Mooj isn't the best GM and Aaron Glenn could still salvage the most out of this team. Rob Hatton specifically, I mean, he takes over for Greg Nejma, who, how can you be here for so long when the team's so bad in the role that you occupy? It's like, if I did my job and the results were what they were for the last 16 years, I probably wouldn't have that job title anymore. So like from that perspective, it's like, can it actually get much worse from an administrative perspective in a football operations perspective? But being that it's George Payton's nephew and now we have his protege, his nephew, his mentor, like it is kind of weird. Like the vibes I get, it's like it's not
And
the tree I
and
would pluck from.
and really, we talk about them taking from Denver, but in all reality, Peyton and Spielman were Minnesota guys together.
You're right, Minnesota. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so it kind of goes back a little further than that. But I mean, listen, like I said, I mentioned the nepotism thing, but there is also the fact that there are only 32 teams and there
Mm-hmm.
are only so many guys. So you will often have overlap. How many times do you see guys get brought in? This guy knows this guy from here. And, again, Aaron Glenn was recommended by Peyton, highly thought of. So you're going to get some degree of that. This is probably a little bit more, with Moogie. So we'll see what happens there. I think the thing that worried me most about Moogie was the presser when he literally got one question. What do you look for in a player? He's like, I got to check with Aaron later
Yeah.
tonight. I don't know. Not I would think everyone, GM or not, I would think everyone who works in an NFL front
He could have
office,
just given like a cheesy like philosophy that he
and
believes
that's
in.
all
Like, we're
anybody
just
would
gonna
have
right,
given.
right, right. Like, we're
Hard
gonna build
worker,
through the
loves ball,
trenches, or
dedicated,
yeah,
eats,
sure,
sleeps, and drinks football. Okay,
yeah,
but
yeah,
to be like, I'm going to talk to Aaron later and we're going to discuss that. Like, no, dude, we're asking for what you like. But
yeah.
yeah, maybe he was nervous, his first time as the guy sitting in front of the media. And he just gave a stupid answer, which does happen. But Phil Savage, a guy who we like,
Mm-hmm.
retained kind of a consultant, which
Mm-hmm.
in the time I've been a fan, that's usually the ushering out the door of a guy. Like we like you, we respect you, you've done good work for us. We're not going to say you're fired. We'll list you as a consultant, and then one day you suddenly won't be on the website anymore as a consultant.
Right.
For those of you who remember, that's what happened with Neil Glatt, who is the guy that Jaime replaced. The Jets and Neil Glatt have parted ways, and Neil Glatt's going to stay on as an advisor, and you never heard his name again. That was it.
Mhm.
So I think with Savage, he'll at least be around through the draft because they need somebody who's been around for a little while, who has some experience. I don't. I mean, I don't want to question Savage's integrity, but I don't know that you get a guy's best work when they're like, "We're going to let you go, but we want you to run our draft or help run our draft." I think when you get to this level, you're going to get you're going to get a guy give his at least, he's not going to like mail it in and not try.
Right. Right.
But maybe when you have that job, that permanent job, maybe you're willing to put in those few extra hours a day than when you're just an advisor consultant who I mean, again, I I would imagine he's, making calls. People know guys around the league. He might be
Mhm.
making calls to get a more permanent position, an assistant GM somewhere, something like that. But any thoughts on that?
Which
I
I
know,
think
like I said, I
was
know we both like him. We're both fans.
yeah.
I was hoping he would stay on as an assistant GM or something more permanent than consultant. Which, again, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he legitimately will be a consultant. But that's you're keeping Spielman an ex-GM, and then like how many ex-GMs you're going to call every time you're making a transaction?
Yeah, I agree. I wish maybe the name consultant might change after the draft, like you said, and that seems to be when all the shakeup happens. But I mean, the guy kept the lights on from like what November till now. I mean, he went to the Hula Bowl, Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl. So like, shout out to Phil. I mean, I met him last year. He's a really nice guy. I know he was obviously there this year. A couple of Jets people that were there told me they've talked to him this year. So glad that obviously he was there getting the intel. But like you said, is it going to be his best work? I would hope. He's a professional, and it would be. But let's say he has like a handshake agreement with another team after the draft, and it comes down to the guy that he knows that team wants and a guy that he wants for the Jets or whatever the case is. It's going to be a lot of questioning with that stuff, but you just got to hope that on their way out they just do the best they can. Obviously, I don't know if I hope he's not running the draft because obviously you want the new guys to have more of an
Yeah,
impression than
exactly.
anything else. But he's going to have the most intel out of everybody in that room based on what the Jets have looked for in the past. He's going to know what that is. Obviously, he needs to still match up the philosophies with Mooj and Glenn and figure out what they want to find the best players for their philosophies. But yeah, it's going to be a tough one. And I know that usually right after the draft is when the shakeup comes. So I'm looking at my Excel spreadsheet of like area scouts and national scouts and all this. And I'm like, how many of these guys are actually going to be here? And I don't know if it's more like Ray Agnew, the third, like, the GM's son. Is he still going to be our pro scout after the draft? We don't know. So like some of these guys all the way down to the bottom might be on their way out.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find who I'm trying to think who. Oh, it was Patton. Patton's nephew was the other guy. I was thinking I was going to say they added someone else yesterday, but he
Mm-hmm.
was given the assistant position. I don't know what his role was in Denver before the Jets plucked him. Um,
Let me look it up right now.
somebody said, but I don't know if they were joking. Someone said on the message boards on Jet Nation, how common is it to jump from scout to assistant GM? But I don't know that he was a scout. I don't know that he didn't hold a higher position in Denver. And I don't see his bio
He
on
was
the
a
Jets.
national scout for the Broncos.
Okay, so he was scout. He wasn't assistant
National
GM. Okay.
scouts, like I guess one of the highest scouts you could probably be until you're like a director of college scouting, I would assume. So he did make a pretty sizable leap, but he's not assistant GM, is he? Is that his official title?
Um, I or whatever. That's why I don't see him on
I
the.
thought he was co-director of pro personnel.
Yeah, because he took that's the position that was vacated. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't mean assistant. I think I was thinking in my mind that he would be because of his experience with Moogie, that he'd be his right hand man, but not in title.
Yeah, I still
Um,
wonder if we get an assistant GM then, like in actual title assistant
God, I hope not.
GM.
That's
I
a
don't.
lot of people.
Yeah, that's a lot because now because you got rid of Dave Sosi, who was a football administrator last year, according to my spreadsheet, and you didn't really replace that position. You replaced Nejma. So there's still football admin positions to add, but I don't know. Do they do that, or do they want to just maybe say less is more in the front office and then go build out your analytics department, your scouting department, and do all that stuff? Because you can build the analytics department right now. You don't have to wait till after the draft. Obviously, the scouting department might have to wait for the most shakeup, but as far as the administrative side of it, I don't know how many more people you're going to need, because I see co-assistant director of pro personnel. We had two guys, two co-assistant directors of pro personnel,
that
and
was
a
another thing
regular.
someone pointed out. That was a debate that was going on, like how many teams do this.
Yeah.
Someone claimed they looked at a bunch of teams and no one else does this.
No, yeah. The only one
I'd be
that like where the
surprised if this was the only team doing it, but
right.
I also wouldn't be surprised if this was the only team doing it.
Yeah, they looked at like a handful of successful teams and like one or two bad teams to like kind of get a view of like both ends of it. And the Jets were very skewed toward the bad teams in the league. And even still, like our analytics department was like, at one point it was 2 people. It's only 3 right now, but like there's some that's like 12, 15 people. And I'm not saying it has to be that big, but like you need to invest resources into other things other than just like, administrative and, stuff like that. You need analytics, you need scouting. So I'm hoping that a lot of
Yeah.
this still shakes up.
As Dan says in the chat here, Daniel says in the chat, it is hard to turn over a lot of these guys in the middle of draft season. And it is. I mean, teams are executives, scouts, whatever, they're all dug in right now. And that's why the contracts are set up to expire after the draft. They hang around with that.
Right.
Dano or Danger Zone says, if I asked you on Thanksgiving how our front office and coaching staff would look in 3 months, do you think it looks better or worse than you would have thought? I mean, impossible to say, because the past group, there wasn't a lot of, with Greg Nejma, he's held a variety of high level roles. They haven't had a great deal of success in the past few GMs, free agency. I've wondered that, like, how long can you keep the pro personnel department in place? Like, who was the guy who said give Tremaine Johnson a boatload of money?
Mm-hmm.
Who was the guy who said? And the Laken Tomlinson one is tough, because this is a guy who was a multiple time Pro Bowler and then shows up here and he looks like he's never played football before.
And that was John
I
Benton.
don't know how you
I
project
remember.
that.
I remember the episode of One Jets Drive where John Benton, the offensive line coach, was like, "This guy is the guy who's going to stop Aaron Donald," and I'm like,
I made
"All
that
right,
exact comment to
let's
someone the other
go."
day.
And he
It may have
sucked.
been I can't remember if it was in the YouTube comments or I was chatting with somebody. May have been during one of the episodes I did. And I said, and he mentioned Benton. I think it was a Twitter exchange. I was talking to someone on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And
Because he just got hired somewhere.
And I said, that's the dude who told the everyone in the room that he could block Aaron Donald one-on-one.
Yep.
I mean, if you're trusting your people, and you're dealing, I mean, even not that you shouldn't be watching these guys, but if you were doing it all blindly and they were, just describing the candidates to you, and the guy you pay to coach your offensive line says this guy's been to multiple Pro Bowls and I believe he can block the best player in the NFL one-on-one, you'd be like, all right, like, let's get him. And he was an absolute disaster.
But to Dano's point, I don't know. It's hard to say if it's better or worse. I mean, you have to obviously hope that it's better. Although I can't like sit here and be honest and say that the way that I felt in 2021 about like Saleh and LaFleur, like I was way more hyped about that than I am for Aaron Glenn and Tanner Engstrand. But that doesn't mean that I don't think they can be better. My expectations then was like, oh, we got my guy. Like, we got the top guy. I'm on top of the world. I love this. So now it's hard to say I feel better about it, but I have more hope that they're going to be better, even though like offensive line coach isn't like terribly inspiring. I like that they kept Jefferson. I love the Aaron Curry hire. I thought it was Chris Harris Jr., but it's just Chris Harris. So I had that coach completely wrong in my head. I thought we were getting the short, scrappy slot corner from Denver. And I was like, no, we're getting some other guy from like Tennessee or whatever. So I can't say that I feel like the warm and fuzzies, but I am more like optimistic that we're going to have some football vibes and not country club vibes, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I don't love how inexperienced that. Like I said, adding Turner, adding Spielman does help a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, you want to, when you get a GM, like that was the thing with Joe Douglas, with Robert Sala. Well, I guess with Sala and Glenn, it's similar. They were both hot candidates. I remember the Joe Douglas hire. It was like, the thought was the Jets got a guy who was going to be a hot cat because, of course, you remember the timing of it was sort of at a time nobody was looking for a GM
Hmm.
because it was right after the draft. And a lot of what you were reading was like the Jets just got a guy who was going to be a top candidate next year.
Hmm.
With Moogie, you never heard his name until the day he was like announced as a finalist, and it was like, oh, like you're following all the interviews of who every team is interviewing. Nobody else was interviewing him. And then he gets the job, and it's like, all right, here's another time where we're wondering, or you're hoping, well, I hope the Jets know better than everyone else in the NFL because no one else was interested.
Yeah,
Um,
and Mooj was his first interview was on January 11th, and I know we joked in our DMs about it, but like that was the day that they interviewed 5 GM candidates, and they just went speed dating. They had Mooj, they had Lance Newmark, who was an obvious finalist, Trey Brown, who became a finalist, Chris Spielman, obviously we hired Rick, and then Ryan Grigson, who was pretty quickly like cleared from the list of names that it wasn't going to be. So then if you look at the coaches who were interviewed right before the 11th, you have Spagnolo and Mike Loxley on the 10th and Aaron Glenn on the 9th. So maybe there's a good chance Aaron Glenn gave you a list of names and 2 days later you went and fulfilled some of those interviews because 3 of those 5 names became finalists and we hired the fourth of the fifth's brother. So a lot of things. And if you just look chronologically at when people were interviewed, like you said, you could kind of line up that perhaps Glenn tipped off these names to the Jets and put them on their radar because I didn't, like I said, I had no idea who Mooj was until that day. I know who Trey
and was
Brown was, and I didn't
was
know
there
who
any
Lance Newmark was.
Glenn? Because he's only ever worked with Denver, so he never would have worked with Aaron Glenn, right?
Mooj, no, he was only with Denver since 2012. It's the Sean
So
Payton
Sean,
connection
yeah,
that gets him.
yeah,
Yeah.
Sean Payton probably told Aaron Glenn.
Yep.
So it's like a guy he didn't work with, but recommended by Peyton.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see
Yeah.
because we know how much Peyton loves the Jets, and I'm sure he would have
So
loved
that's
nothing
the
more.
thing too. It's like, are we getting the
He
wool
would
pulled
have
over our
loved you
eyes by
nothing
another
more than
Peyton? First it was Peyton Manning with Adam Gase. It's like now Sean Payton doing it. But like then you hear Aaron Glenn talking at the podium and he's like, "We're the New York Jets. We're built for this shit." And he's like, "This is the job I wanted." And it's like, all right, maybe Sean Payton's not getting us one more time. But like, could you imagine if at the very end Sean Payton's like fooled you? Like
Yeah, I think it's
the
it's
evil
nice to
genius Sean Payton.
yeah, it was nice to see Aaron Glenn all fired up and we're built for this and all that. And I'm like, cool, but are we? Like, what has this team done that tells you they're built for anything other than having the intestinal fortitude to go out to MetLife in terrible weather and watch the team play bad football for a long time? I feel like that's what Jets fans are built for, dealing with not rooting for a good football team. But I,
Yeah.
I get where Aaron Glenn's coming from. He wants to change the culture and he wants to, you see the hard knock stuff where he talks about he wants guys who are used to winning, which that's something that I don't know when I kind of stopped thinking about that, but many years ago, I used to say all the time, I want to use my day 3 picks. Back then it was probably talking about teams like Miami and FSU because that's when they were dominant. But I used to say, give me FSU's backups in the 7th round because their backups are probably better than most team starters.
Mm.
Um, I'm sure that wouldn't have worked, but I love the idea of getting guys throughout your roster from winning programs who are probably better than you realize because I mean those FSU teams, those Miami teams, Florida teams under Spurrier, like they were just so dominant. They were that era Georgia and Ohio State.
Right.
And God, I was watching I was watching a Georgia game a couple days ago. I can't even remember the guy's name. It was like a backup D tackle whose name I've never heard. Um, and it was only one sequence, but like he made like 3 plays in a row where I'm like, this dude, and he was like a junior. So I'm like, I don't know if this guy's coming out, but here's a guy no one's talking about, and he's barely playing at Georgia. But when he did, he looked phenomenal. Again, very small sample size, but you
Mhm.
just assume Georgia. It's not a fluke that the guy looked great. So yeah, I've always thought like go ahead and try to steal from other people's, or not steal, but try to find some steals by grabbing guys off of rosters at the bottom of rosters,
Yep.
some unknown guys. And speaking of unknown guys, Dylan, what do you got for us from Mobile? Dylan was at the Senior Bowl a week or two ago, and gonna go over some notes that he took on who impressed and who didn't. I mean, I've talked a little bit here about guys that I've watched, but Dylan took the time to go watch. So what'd you find, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, you have to start with the most important position on the field, quarterback. Unfortunately, none of them really inspired, although there was potential for me to be inspired by some of these guys. Like, I was really ready to be wowed by Jalen Milroe and his athleticism. And I thought all the hype around, Jackson Dart could have been cool. Riley Leonard was just coming off of a really deep playoff run with Notre Dame. So I thought it was really cool that he didn't back out, because a lot of Ohio State and Notre Dame players did. So kudos to him for staying. And then Dylan Gabriel was the other guy that I thought was, I guess, a headliner of the class. And I like that he's a lefty. So that's brownie points for me. But I got there first day, and obviously it's first day. You want to be, as critical about these quarterbacks as you can, but Jackson Dart couldn't control a snap. Jalen Milroe was dirting like the easiest check down passes and then sailing the other ones deep, like more than 10 yards down the field. Dylan Gabriel didn't really impress me. The most impressive one was Tyler Shuck to me from Louisville. But by the end of the week, Jackson Dart, kind of did okay. I thought he was a little bit calmer in the pocket. His footwork did get a little bit better. I watched practice all 3 days with Dom C. Shout out Dom C. and Jets Chaos Jeremy. So bouncing off Dom C with Jackson Dart was pretty important for me, because I wanted to get his thoughts about what he thought his mechanics looked like, because I kind of came away with a similar thing. He's just a little happy feet in the pocket, throws off his back foot a little bit too much. But by the third day, he was putting all his cleats in the ground and really driving into his throws. Again, they weren't special throws by any means, but he had a couple good plays. And then in the game, he had a couple scrambles that I thought were pretty good, showed off his athleticism a little bit. So I guess if I had to say there's one guy from the group that did the best, it'd be Jackson Dart, because I thought he showed the most progression over the week. But dude, I'm scared that these guys are going to get overdrafted, and I know the Jets need one for the future, and I don't see it in this group, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I mean, the one that worries me most is Jalen Milroe. We've talked about him offline. The carelessness with the football, the fumbles, the turnovers, the lack of consistency with accuracy. He throws a great deep ball from the games
Yeah,
I've
he
watched.
did.
I've seen beautiful deep balls. But it's everything else that he's been like not at a level where you're like, oh, this can be the future quarterback. Like,
Yep.
okay, he can be an NFL quarterback and he'll play. What worries me, yeah, that's what worries me. The Jets take him in a reach. I think I would prefer, if you're gonna roll the dice on a quarterback, I would say wait till day 3 and grab a guy like Curtis Rourke, someone like that. Yeah, this is not a good crop. I mean, Jackson Dart. Now we've talked about it. I've talked about it. It kind of went, I don't know, mini viral, but that Charlie Weiss tweet saying Jackson Dart will be a first round pick. Daniel in the chat says Will Howard. He's another one. Probably, I would take him ahead of some of the other guys. I think Will Howard might go round 2, but definitely by round 3. But I don't know. I think they're gonna want a guy who can run, and nobody runs better than Milroe, and it worries me. But it is what it is. They're back in a position where they might have a quarterback for 1 year. I don't think they will. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to leave. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't leave, I think it'll get ugly during the season if things aren't going smoothly, because he's going to be his own man, and you're going to have a rookie coordinator trying to tell Aaron Rodgers what to do, and Aaron Rodgers is going to feel like I've done what you've told me to do, and we're 2-3, and that's not good enough. And I'm gonna make my own adjustments, and my receivers know my signals, so I'll call your plays, and then I'll make my adjustments. So I could see it getting ugly if Rodgers does come back. Again, that's part of having a very, very young staff. So I think Rodgers either walks away or he comes back and it gets ugly. Um, Either way, you don't have a quarterback beyond this season. I don't think there'll be, can he mentor a guy for a year? Maybe, but I don't. I of the realistic options, I think Dart's my favorite, but I don't like him at 7. Um,
No.
and that's now the conversation. That's something Rick Spielman talked about on their pod after the Senior Bowl was with hey last year when we left Mobile, meaning him and Ryan Wilson, and I think Ryan Wilson may have said this part with Spielman agreeing with him. When we left Mobile last year, nobody said that Bo Nix was going to be a top 10, top 11 pick. Nobody said Michael Penix was going to be a first round pick or go where he went. They may have said first round, but these guys will, there's a chance that guys will climb, and Jackson Dart coming out of Mobile has the momentum to grab that opportunity to be the third quarterback off the board, and that could mean top 10.
Yeah.
I don't love that idea. I talked about it the other day. I like the player a lot. He's probably the guy that I've mentioned most in talking about taking the QB3. But that offense, they run at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it's one read at Ole Miss. So you're not asking them to do a lot. It's basically, major project, I guess. And I don't like the idea of a major project in the top 10.
Yeah, no, I think major project applies to a lot of these guys. And Dart to me was like a question mark at 42 coming into the Senior Bowl. And now all of a sudden people want to talk about him at 7. And I'm like, that's just way too rich for me when you're talking about like resource allocation. Like I was of the mindset that going down, I was going to be confirming that we could trade up to the back end of the first round for Jalen Milroe because of his traits. That's not at all what I came away from the week with. In my notes, I was like super disappointed. His hand size is well under threshold for, what they consider an NFL quarterback at 8 3/4 inch hands. So none of these guys really, like, I started getting off them at 42. I was like, I don't want any of these guys at 42. Then I'm thinking about the third round pick that we have, which is Detroit's, because obviously we gave up ours to Vegas for Devontae. So we have like the back end of the third round, and it's pick like 91 or something like that.
Yeah, 92.
That's probably where I would even start to consider the guy, because they're all major projects. And if, like to Daniel's point about Will Howard, like if he's there, I would love to take a Will Howard at that pick. I'm not trading up not even one pick for a quarterback in this round, because they're just way too questionable. Kyle McCord is another one that, kind of fits in that bucket, but like third round is where the conversation starts for me. So like, I'm cool with Shedeur, Cam Ward going 1 or 2 or wherever they fall. They're probably not going to be there at 7. I want to see how far the drop off is, because last year it was pick 12 to pick 150 from Bo Nix to Spencer Rattler. I want to see if it's like pick 2 to pick 110 this year, from Shedeur or Cam to Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe, whoever they decide. But it's like, it only takes one. I hate that cliche about the draft. It's true though. I just hope the Jets aren't the one. That's Joe Shane, take Jackson Dart at 3, please. Like, just go QB and make it all easy for me, because I really don't want to see Jackson Dart in New York, especially at 7.
Yeah, I think it's 7. I had this thought earlier. I tweeted it out because you have this nightmare scenario. I actually had the thought when Myles Garrett demanded the trade. He wants to go to a winner. And I start going through my head, who are the teams that are right on the cusp, who he could be put over the top? And of course, you think of the Buffalo Bills. And then I see this tweet, the Deion Dawkins is recruiting Myles Garrett. And I just think to myself, man, if you got to block that guy, it made me think of, for those of you who are old enough to remember, or who saw the tweet, or who have read the history, when the Jets went out and gave Kevin Mawai a boatload of money. That was specifically because, and Bill Parcells said this years later, he may have said it at the time, Bill Parcells' philosophy was always, if you want, like, if you want to win the Super Bowl, the easiest way to do it is to win your division. So Bill Parcells believed in building your team to win the division. And at that time, the Bills had a 5,000-pound nose tackle named Ted Washington that the Jets just could not block. They could not run the ball up the middle because Ted Washington, I think he was like a 350 guy, 360 in the middle of that Buffalo defense, and the Jets had no chance against him. And Parcells was like, we gotta get a guy. And Mawai was a free agent, and Parcells paid him a bunch of money, and it worked. So if you go out and get Myles Garrett, and if Aaron Glenn employs that philosophy, I think OT at 7 becomes a lot more likely. If they know they got to block Myles Garrett twice a year and they want to win that division. I mean, the thing is, the Jets are so far off from being able to compete with Buffalo, but that doesn't mean you don't start building now to try to knock them off the pedestal whenever you can. So that's that. The Myles Garrett situation is a very interesting one, and I certainly hope that dude stays out of the division.
Yeah, 100%. I would definitely not like to see, especially if they somehow kept Von Miller, because Greg Rousseau is still budding and they still have Epinesa, who's good too. So like they would really have an arsenal. But yeah, then it would draw into question, are we now taking a tackle like Will Campbell at 7 and potentially, I don't want to say reaching, because Will Campbell is a really good prospect, but like, are we now kind of like reaching to fill a need to now just be able to compete in the division? Buffalo boat raced us in points last year by like 250 total points on the season. So it's not like we're, like you said, close to competing with them from that standpoint. But it does, whenever we play Buffalo, it seems like the Jets always get up. And other than the 40-0 game, I mean, we've kind of had Buffalo from, at least until the D-line got decimated. But past years, that's what we did. We wanted to compete against Buffalo. We built the team to beat Buffalo and stop Josh Allen. So that would be how I would also look at, competing with my team too, because that's the only way to get to the playoffs the quickest, like he said, is to win the division. I full-heartedly believe in that philosophy.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens there, but what else you got on the Senior Bowl? Who else did you like?
I want to skip running backs because honestly, like, it's such a hard week for them, like, to evaluate, because their only one-on-one reps are against linebackers, and it's just flat routes, and they're faster than the linebackers they go up against. So it's really easy to, win those one-on-one situations. Although I do think Damian Martinez from Miami and Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech looked really smooth in the practices. Obviously, again, it's like just kind of like a thud practice install. It's not really like to the ground tackling. And then Trevor Etienne, Travis's brother, the Georgia running back, I thought he looked good too. But it's hard to, come away with notes. And I was a little critical of the practice schedule, because there's years past where like you were really able to see some cool linebacker running back drills with the garbage cans set up, and they really do a good job. And this year, it felt like, especially the first 2 practices, there just wasn't a lot for the running backs to really like accentuate, or the linebackers either. So I'll skipping them mostly. Running back or wide receivers and tight ends. Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. I mean, if you want a guy to compliment Garrett Wilson, just smooth mover. I want to pull up his total measurements so I don't get it inaccurate
And
here.
I thought him and Jalen Noel, I thought they both looked really good.
Yeah, I love when the teammates play too, because then you can compare them, and then you go back and watch the film, and you watch them both at the same time.
Yeah, I watched them a fair bit in the weeks leading up to the Senior Bowl. They were a couple of receivers I watched. Both really good players, both different skill sets. But I thought, and I know that I think it was Higgins that Daniel Jeremiah commented on right away. I think he was a guy who he said was just outside his top 50 players. And just watching a couple of reps, and he was like, he starts questioning himself.
There's no way this guy's not a second round pick, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think they like to gas up everybody who's there, because they're not there to put anyone down. But yeah, I think Higgins, I think he's really good. Like I said, Noel does a great job of creating separation. Higgins is more physical. He can create some separation, but he can also out jump you, high point the ball. Whereas Noel's gonna, I actually think I tweeted out one of his reps leading up to the Senior Bowl, where he just, literally the DB just fell flat on his backside trying to hang with him, and he, creating separation was no problem at all. And I think both really good players, and we know the Jets do have a bunch of Iowa State guys. Maybe they swap one of them out for Allen Lazard.
No,
Maybe
please.
Lazard goes and they bring one of those guys in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Jaden Higgins is listed at 6'3", 217, and Jalen Noel is 5'9" and 196.
Oh, yeah, I would have thought 5'10", 5'11".
They got him at 5'9" and 6'8" is the official Senior Bowl measurement. Only 8.5-inch hands. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so completely different body types. Like you said, though, I think Higgins is more of the possession contested catch, but he did have a really special one-on-one route where he did a hesitation release and then just climbed up the slot in a fade and front pylon right over the shoulder catch. He had a good 3, 4, 5 yards of separation on his defender. It was really special. So to see a guy that big also move a little bit nicer too. It's I don't normally gravitate towards those guys, but he was making plays every day. Another wideout that I have to shout out because the story about him is also very interesting is Jack Besh from TCU. His brother was notably killed in the New Orleans terror attacks. The guy drove through the parade of people, and his brother was killed. He was a Princeton athlete, so they did a huge memorial for him. All the players wore a sticker on the back for his brother. I believe his name was Tiger. So it was cool to see him. He had the game-winning catch in the game, but then he made a play every single practice. He was making cool, extended catches, one-handed catches, touchdowns in one-on-ones. So Jack Besh, I mean, everything he got this week was deserved, and he was probably the guy who might have helped himself the most at the wide receiver position. So Shout out to Jack. He was 6'1" and a quarter and 212 pounds. So I guess I'd play him as a power slot if you're not going to put him opposite, Garrett on the outside, or you move Garrett inside and use Besh on the outside with whoever else you want on the perimeter. But I think he's a guy that you can probably move around and use as a power slot too. So take advantage of his mismatches because he's got really good hands.
Yeah, Daniel asking in the chat, I know you've got to have some thoughts on this guy, Mike Green at Marshall.
Oh, shoot.
Looked like an absolute monster. If you go back and watch him against Ohio State, played really well against them, beating some of the best linemen in the country. And that's what you look for. That's when you see these smaller school guys. To me, that's why I jumped on the Harold Fannin bandwagon, because I watched him during the season, and he absolutely smoked Texas A&M. And I think Penn State, it was back-to-back weeks, went well over 100 yards. So that's how Fannin kind of, that's when a guy really gets your respect. They're putting up numbers against smaller schools, and it's okay, great. What can you do against the bigger schools? And he didn't just show up. I mean, he dominated. So a great job by him during the season. But any thoughts on those two guys, Green and Fannin?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, Daniel, I buried the lead here, because when there's players that don't finish the week of practice because they're that good during the week of practice, they should probably get shouted out first. So that's on me completely. Mike Green, Shamar Stewart, and Trey Amos. Obviously, Mike Green is the edge defender from Marshall we're about to talk about. Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher from Texas A&M, and Trey Amos, the safety from Ole Miss. All three prospects that checked all the boxes, quote unquote, during the practice week. I think they each only practiced 2 of the 3 days. They were given the green light to not practice on the 3rd day. So, you're doing a lot of stuff right at that point when you're not, finishing for good reasons, obviously not injury reasons. But Mike Green had the rep of the week. It came at the expense of Josh Connerly playing out of position, which is really unfortunate because I do think Josh Connerly is a really good left tackle. And the fact that he was put in at right tackle, they do it every year. So it's it's not his fault. Just the victim of circumstance, I guess, against Mike Green. But this dude plays with his hair, his shoulder pads, his whole body on fire. I've never seen somebody so rowdy at a practice like this. This might have been as close to the Jermaine Johnson type of practice at the Senior Bowl as it gets, but even Jermaine Johnson, what he did was ridiculous. So Mike Green, by now you've probably seen the viral clip. He put his head right in the chest of Josh Connerly and flat backed him, but that happened all week. Every time you put a one-on-one rep for Mike Green, he was winning it. So to me, he's one of those guys where I'm cool if you trade down to 10, 12, 13, and go grab Mike Green. I mean, you could stay put and grab Shamar Stewart, who we could talk about from Texas A&M, but I kind of like these edge rushers that really helped themselves this week, and they've definitely solidified as probably top 20 prospects in this class for me.
Yeah, I was glad to see Connerly win Offensive Lineman of the Week.
Yes, yeah.
Because he's a dude, as you said, they put him out of position to go one-on-one against probably the best pass rusher of the week down there.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a shame, but, that's how linemen go viral, is by getting knocked onto their backs,
Mm-hmm.
or otherwise they gotta launch somebody into outer space to go viral, which is a lot tougher to do. But I think right now, Green, I've heard people say he could be a top 10 guy. I mean, an elite edge rusher who's winning inside, winning outside. I was able to get my hands on the Senior Bowl film, and super impressive guy. Still going through some of it. I haven't watched everyone, but I thought he was really good. One guy that was a little disappointing. I don't know if you had any thoughts. I know, in fact, Rick Spielman, I have to go back now and listen to his recaps of days 1, 2, and 3 to refresh my memory, kind of get a listen as to who he liked. Day 1, he wasn't very impressed with Deion Walker, who, as I've said, was my favorite guy coming into the year. Was a different player this year. And funny enough that I think they said that after day 3. I think they were, or may have been day 2, where they said day 2 he looked a lot better, got his pad level down, not consistently enough, like basically saying he's going to need some coaching, but basically said he doesn't look like the guy he was 2 years ago. And that's why Deion Walker was my favorite player coming into this class, because I saw him as a freshman and was like, oh my God. And then as a sophomore, a lot of the same. And then this year, I waited till very late in the year to watch him, because I'd watched so much of him as a freshman and sophomore that I felt like, okay, I have a feel for this player. He's a first-round pick. And then I watched him from this year, and I'm like, what the hell happened to this guy? So I don't know if it was injuries, and they basically said on their day 2 or 3 recap exactly what I've been saying, which is like, please standing up right off the snap, and at times he's just out there. He's just on the field, but doing nothing. So I don't think a guy decides in his final year before turning pro that he's going to stop trying. So in my mind, I'm like, there had to be an injury. There had to be something there. And he did. I think day 2, they said he did leave the field early at one point with an injury. I don't know if he came back, but even if it is an injury, as I've said previously, that's not a great thing, because he weighs 347. So when you're that big, if you're leaving the field injured, that's going to hurt you. But Daniel asks in the chat here, Dylan, I want to throw this one at you because I've heard this comparison made. Can Tez be the next Tank?
Tank Dell Light, which is like, which is hilarious that I'll say Tank Dell Light, because he's even smaller than Tank Dell. Like, it's honestly amazing when the measurements came down. I think it was Dom who was joking with us. 5'9" and a quarter, 156 pounds. Like, at the NFL level, that's going to be really hard to win if you don't have a free release off the line of scrimmage. And there's a lot of one-on-one reps that if you go back in, like, on the film, I know you were talking about, like, watching some of it. If you go back and watch Tez Johnson's reps, there's times where he's trying to hesitate so hard against the defender that he loses balance himself, and the defender didn't take advantage. It's like, you can, obviously you're watching with a clicker, so it's a little easier, but if I see a wide receiver slipping in his release and he's 156 pounds, I'm pushing him to the ground. There's no way he's going to be a relevant player on that play, because he's going to be in the turf. And there was just times where he got away with it one-on-one and ended up creating separation at the top of the route and catching the ball. Not saying he can, he's going to be bad at the NFL level, but it's so hard to win when you're that size consistently. And I do think Tank Dell is a better prospect than Tez Johnson, just truthfully. But Tez Johnson did have a good week of one-on-ones in the overarching scheme of things. He is a very good route runner. But when he lost balance and the defenders didn't take advantage, it's like, okay, that rep was completely moot against a veteran slot corner, and he's irrelevant on the play. So it's going to be a tricky evaluation for him. I'm not going to say, oh, it only takes one team, because I do think a lot of teams will like Tez Johnson, but Tank Dell Light, and that's hard to say.
Yeah, that seemed to be the consensus, the concerns. I mean, there's small, and then there's, oh my God, like, can
Yeah.
this guy play in the league small? How durable is he going to be if he takes a couple of shots? In the chat, Danger Zone, Dane saying Xavier Worthy was 165. He was faster guy, obviously. I mean, fastest guy ever in the league.
I think his speed allows him to play more on the perimeter, like whereas Tez Johnson would probably have to be a slot only. Obviously, I think
Yeah.
Xavier Worthy's a slot player too, but I do think because of his speed that you just said, like you can use him in easier and more efficient ways, including on the perimeter.
And as you know, as is the case with a lot of players, a lot of it'll be where he lands. Like when you
Yeah, I
land with
mean, you're
Andy,
going to the Chiefs,
one of
like
the
yeah, they're
greatest
gonna
offensive minds, he's going to find ways to get you open,
100%.
and let you take advantage of that speed, because it really, I mean, that beyond off the charts is an understatement when it comes to him. And Tez is fast too. He'll probably run sub 4.4s.
True.
I don't know that he'll run 4.22s or 4.21s, but he will put up some really good times. Anyone else, Dylan? Anyone else you want to touch on before we roll out?
I wanted to look up Xavier Worthy's snap share. 301 in the slot, 13 in the backfield, and 535 as a perimeter wide receiver. So I don't think Tez Johnson's getting 500 perimeter reps at wide receiver in the NFL. So I think that would be the biggest difference there, Dano. Anybody else that I want to shout out? Yeah, I mean, we talked about some of the defenders. I do want to talk about Oluwafemi Oladejo from UCLA, the edge rusher. I thought it was just kind of coincidental that he was wearing 99 because all he was showing off was his bend and burst on the edge, and it really reminded me of watching our own 99 Will McDonald. So the UCLA edge rusher, he's a little raw to me. I'm not sure where they have him projected, but this is a guy with traits where, like, maybe in the back end of the first round, somebody like, you know, a playoff team like the Eagles or the Chiefs, who are always hunting the trenches in the draft, you know, they always find those guys that just end up working. So Oluwafemi Oladejo, the edge from UCLA, that's definitely somebody I want to give a mention to. Darius Alexander from Toledo, the interior defensive lineman. Plus signs all over my notes when one-on-ones came. Darius Alexander was in the backfield of almost every team rep as well. So he probably had one of the biggest days in terms of helping, or weeks in terms of helping his stock from an interior defensive perspective. His teammate Aeneas Peebles also had a good one, good week of practice, who you've shouted out on here before. I remember you saying him. And then I want to give a shout out to at least two offensive linemen. Willie Lampkin. This dude is so great. I mean, the fact that you're 5'10", 270 pounds, stonewalling some of these defensive guys that were there, giving up like 60 pounds to some of these guys at 330 pounds. Like, dude's anchor is mean for a 270 pound center. I don't know if the Jets will love him. Some teams just won't have him on his board because it's not their size. And I know we're going to have to learn about Mooj and Glenn and their tendencies and their thresholds and all their specifications that they need for certain things. But somebody's going to get a damn good player in Willie Lampkin, I think, and that'll be a really fun one to watch. And then Miles Frazier from LSU. He was one of the guys that I watched right before I went down. I just like watched all the LSU linemen because there's 4 in the draft, and I was impressed with Miles. I put a second round grade on him, and now at this point, it's like, is he even going to be there at 42? I don't know. Some teams are going to like that. And he played right tackle on the last day of practice, and he still did well there again. So he had a teammate, Emory Jones, who plays right tackle at LSU. And I thought Frazier did just as good on day 3 of practice at right tackle that Emory Jones did. So it's going to be real interesting to see what happens with Frazier, but he definitely needed a shout out. So, and I'll guess one more, Marcus Mbo from Purdue. I think somebody we touched on briefly as Glenn pulls up Frazier here. You see him number 50 at right guard.
70.
Or 70, excuse me. 50 is Emory Jones, yeah. Just
Number
absolutely
70.
dirts this guy.
Plants the DT in the ground, and so much of that from him. He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And real quick on Embo,
yeah,
that's how I've been saying it too. Daniel Jeremiah, when he said it during the broadcast, the M is silent. It's just Bo. I'm like,
Marcus
oh,
Bowe. Okay,
so I'm
cool.
a moron. I've been calling this guy Marcus Embo for 2 years.
Yeah,
And
I
that's the
hate that,
problem.
right?
When you're watching all 22, and even if you're watching the TV broadcast, you're rarely mentioning the lineman.
Yeah.
So I've never heard anyone else say his name before. And yeah, he was one specifically I asked Dom C about. Dom said he wasn't that good in one-on-ones.
Hmm.
But Jeremiah said the same thing, but he said he's better in team and better in the game than he is in one-on-ones. He's been a guy I've been watching as sort of a mid-round right tackle
Hmm.
for. I guess I started watching him early last year.
Yeah, he's one of those guys where if like for me, he was my first eyes on experience was the Senior Bowl. So it made me think, okay, what about his tape really impresses people? And now I'm going to get into his tape probably later on this weekend and figure out why he's so highly thought of even after such a down week at practice. Because I kept hearing him in like the top 50. And I was like, okay, well, he didn't look top 50, but if, like Daniel Jeremiah said, he plays a little bit better with some guys around him, then it's that makes sense. These one-on-one
Here he
periods.
is moving, getting outside on this block on this screen, and
What's he,
that's pretty good
63?
movement for a guy his size. You see him highlighted at the start of the play.
Oh yeah.
Gets out, hits his target, takes him out of the play,
Yep.
and just plays with a mean streak. Physical guy, really good punch.
Yep.
That was, sort of, thinking back off the top of my head, I think that was what jumped out at me first. I saw just a couple reps where that punch, see him jolt the D lineman, and you're like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, that's what you want. You want a guy that right off the snap kind of takes a guy off his path, and he was able to do that a fair bit. And then you see the movement skills are pretty solid.
Yep. I was gonna say
So
balance with offensive linemen is the first thing I look at, and then when they move out in space, how efficient are they in space? Because any lineman can occupy space and not block anybody, but are you finding somebody? Are you hitting them? Are you driving them out of the lane? Like that's the type of stuff that I'm looking for, and I know we've talked about that a bunch of times throughout the draft process. Like that is so important, especially as an interior defender. If you're moving a lot and you're just not connecting on defenders, you're not really doing your job. So I think it's important that when you get out in space, even for tackles like that, you gotta make somebody move off the ball.
yeah, that's been the biggest difference. One of the biggest differences for me over the last couple of years, and now having at this point in my life way more time than I've ever had to watch film. I used to rely too heavily, like most fans do. Like not a lot of people have 8, 9, 10 hours a day to watch film. And some days I do. I'm in a job where I work nights, and if the patients are asleep, I'll throw on some film.
Mm-hmm.
That type of thing. And before I had that much time, I relied not only but primarily on highlight reels, because how else am I going to watch hundreds of players if I've only got an hour or two a day?
Right.
But once my time was freed up significantly a couple years ago, and you start watching all 22 of full games, it's like, man, like I know that a lineman doesn't hit someone on every play, but some guys you're like, I've seen this guy go out in the space 8 times, he hasn't hit anybody yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's he doing?
Yep.
So that's why that's one of the things I look for is, are you hitting someone every few plays? And if you are, that's great, but it's not going to be every play. Look, when you're 320 pounds and trying to chase down a guy who weighs 225, sometimes it's going to be really easy for him to be quick enough to avoid you. But you can't be spending entire games, getting one or two blocks out in space. And that's one thing with Bo that I've seen, that he does find his target. So
Right.
good prospect.
Yep. Real quick before we get out of here, Jaden Daniels just won Offensive Rookie of the Year. They have not announced MVP yet, and the odds have
I
been
thought that
shifting.
happened weeks ago. Did that not happen weeks ago?
No, the NFL honors are right now. The votes have been in since the regular season ended.
Right.
So they haven't announced MVP yet. Where are you going? Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley?
I think Lamar wins it.
Yeah, I think so too.
I would probably give it to Josh, just because I think if Josh had Travis Henry,
Derrick Henry.
sorry, Travis Henry's the old Bills running back. But listen, they're both great players. It was
Sure.
great to see Lamar congratulate him after the win, after that Buffalo Baltimore game. Both great players, both great competitors. It could go either way, but I feel like when it's as close as it is. But you know what? But I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know week 15 or 14, somewhere in that neighborhood, I was looking at Joe Burrow's numbers, and I was like,
Dude,
this dude looks
yeah,
better than all of them.
100%.
Burrow, yeah, I mean, but Barkley, the year you could give it to any of them,
Yeah,
really. I mean, Saquon was special this year, but the league is so tilted toward quarterbacks, it's hard to imagine a non-quarterback winning. It'd be cool if Barkley won, though, because I like him a lot. And it would be a good story because I mean, a few years ago with the Giants, it looked like he was done. Like, a
seriously, yeah.
lot of injuries, not much production. Fans were down on him. And
Yep.
it's like, oh, this guy looks like he's going to be a bust. And all of a sudden, he's doing what he's doing. So I'm happy for him. I'm happy, all those guys. They all had great years. Um, and I don't think you can argue against any of them. If any of those three got it, I
Yeah.
don't see a case to be made to say, oh, here's why he shouldn't have.
Yep. The only
So
reason I don't want Josh to win it is because his offensive line bought him a chain that said MVP
I
with the
saw
jersey
that.
17 on it. And because it was so
I get you,
premature,
but it's not, not his
yeah,
fault. That
yeah.
was stupid on
Of
them.
course his teammates are gonna hype him up like that, but it's
Yeah.
like, damn, now I hope that chain is like irrelevant. It's moot point. Obviously, I think he'll win one eventually, but yeah, I think Lamar would be the choice that I would plant my flag on. But we'll find out in a little bit. Jaden Daniels is Offensive Rookie of the Year, though. I think that one was pretty obvious.
Had my money on Brock Bowers.
Pat Surtain, Defensive Player of the Year. Oh, dude, if Jaden Daniels didn't, there was no other quarterback that would have inspired, and Brock probably got the second number of picks or votes, I would say.
I would imagine. He I saw ESPN did a redraft of the 2024 class.
And they had the Jets taking Bowers.
He picked for the Jets. He took Bowers.
What a nice guy.
Yeah, but that's I would have liked to have won. I don't know how much I would have won. I put money on Bowers to win Rookie of the Year when before the season started, so it was like 30-1 or 40-1 or something.
Yeah, I put money on Malachi Corley, and I'm not happy about just basically putting my money in the toilet.
Well, I'll be honest. I put money on Bowers, Corley, and Braylon Allen, only because I thought if Brees gets dinged up again and Braylon becomes
taken off
back,
yeah.
And Corley I thought would have more than one catch or two catches, whatever he had. I'm worried about that. I mean, I know the coaching staff sucked, but I mean, you can't be that the odds of you being that invisible and still being good. I'm not saying he won't be good, but I have my concerns.
You can't feel confident about anything, obviously, because there was nothing to show, but it's like you just got to hope that it is just coaching incompetence that Nathaniel Hackett didn't get the most out of him. Yeah.
And especially, whether people like it or not, the politics of agents and stuff like that. The fact that he and Aaron Rodgers have the same agent, you would have thought if he'd shown anything at all in practice, Rodgers would have been like, hey, I want this guy in the game to run these couple of plays.
100%.
Like, I want to target, because the agent would have been like, hey, Aaron, like, help my guy out, get him on the field. And if did he have two catches? I remember one early in the year. He had like a 4-yard catch on like 3rd and 10. And I think he had one other catch.
Yeah, I know he had the play that Rodgers threw the block in space on the reverse, but I want to say it was definitely less than like 4 catches.
Yeah, not exactly what I had in mind when I wanted him in that spot. So
3 catches for 16 yards.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, can only go up from there, I hope.
Yeah, right. 1 catch for 2 yards against Arizona, 1 catch for 10 yards against Indy, and 1 catch for 4 yards against Tennessee.
That was the first one, right? That's the one I remember. That was his first catch. It was like third and 10.
It was 3rd and 10 or something like that, and he caught a 4-yard little hitch route, and it was like garbage time, but not garbage time really, but like it was a wasted drive, and you knew it was a wasted drive, and it was like, well, shit, 100% that's exactly what happened.
Yep. All right. Well, that'll wrap this one up, folks. Rick Spielman added to the club. A few other changes. We'll see what happens with Savage. We'd like to see him stay long term. We'll see what happens. And a little bit of Senior Bowl from Mobile. So that wraps this one up. We'll catch you next week. Have a good one, Jets fans.